She braced herself. The last thing she wanted was other confrontation. But better to get it over with now when everything was going wrong. He noted her new stance and nodded slightly, as if in acknowledgement of their adversarial relationship. It is customary in matters like this, he said, sounding even more formal than usual, for the defendant to have an advocate in the counsel. She had known that, but she hadn't remembered it until he mentioned it. All the defendants in treason trials, all 5 of them over the centuries, had advocates to argue their case. She opened her mouth to thank Odin for reminding her of this. He hadn't owed her anything, and yet he was willing to help her, at least this much. But he spoke first. If it's all right with you, I would like to be your advocate. For a moment, she didn't think she heard him correctly. Then she frowned. Another political trick? It couldn't be. Odin, from all his machinations, I don't know what that word is, machinations, was too ethical for that. Thank you, Lela said, but I don't really understand why you would want to given our history. For the first time, his gaze didn't meet hers. Because you were right. No, I wasn't. I thought they were hurting. You said we should learn as much about our neighbors as we can. You were right. If we had known about the Ladara's behavior, we wouldn't have made the mistake we did. We wouldn't have lost all those lives. That's what you'll argue before the council, she said. That and other things. He raised his head. She had never seen his black eyes look so sad. You've taught me much, Lela Dax. You've taught me that just because someone has lived several lifetimes doesn't mean he has an open mind. The closed session was continuous, breaking only for meals and sleep. The counselors weren't allowed to speak to anyone and were in fact housed away from their families for the duration of the trial. Lela had thought the session would last a day, maybe 2, but it seemed to drag on forever. Perhaps more was at stake than her career. If Odin had made an argument about open minds, the entire chamber probably had erupted into anger. On the morning of the 3rd day, the Vulcan emissary arrived on Trill. The emissary wasn't allowed to speak to council until the trial was done, and so was housed in government apartment across the road from Lela's. Lela had hoped for an audience, but had been turned away by Trill. Had been turned away by Trill's security. For the moment, Lela was less than a citizen. She was no one at all. Still, Lela heard rumors that the emissary was interested in the trial and its outcome. Although she didn't know why, Lela herself had never met any Vulcans and didn't know why they would be interested in the internal affairs of Trill. On the other matters, however, Lela heard no rumors. She had no idea what the council would decide about her fate. She wasn't sure what she deserved. Finally, on the 4th afternoon, she couldn't stand being confined in her room any longer. Desperate for some kind of clarity, she went to the only place left, the caves of Makala. The guardians let her in, of course. She wasn't sure they would. She wasn't sure of anything anymore. The caves felt like home. She went deep inside to the pods. The grayish liquid looked inviting. Part of her missed the water, missed the interconnecting pools and the warmth, the sudden communication with the other symbionts. The faintly damp odor made her tingle, and she watched a symbiont surfaced. Energy discharged across the water as the symbiont communicated with one of its unseen fellows. She felt as if she could almost understand what was being said. But almost understanding and truly understanding were 2 very different things. She should have known that. She remembered what it was like to imagine being joined and then experiencing the reality. They were nothing alike. If she remembered that, she might have known that she was making a mistake with the alien ship. Maybe. Odin was right. She was a doubly young. She she had only begun to learn. She stayed in the cave for a very long time, watching the symbionts rise and play in the waters. What a carefree time that had been, and how she hadn't known it. The Dax part of her wanted to see the rest of the world, the rest of the universe, and now it could, at great cost. Perhaps she wasn't worthy of her symbiont. Perhaps her ambitions were too small, her imagination too wild. Perhaps the symbiont's evaluation board had made a mistake in choosing her. But the choice had been made. To remove the symbiont was to kill Lela, and no matter what she had done, she wasn't ready to die. Finally, she sighed and left the pools. Going back wasn't the answer. Going forward, no matter what, was the only solution. She turned away from the pools and took her step. When she returned to her apartment, she was startled to find 3 guards in front of her door. 2 of them were Vulcan. The third was a man she recognized from the diplomatic corps. "What's this?" she asked. The emissary from Vulcan made a request. I felt that we should honor it. Lela frowned at him. "What request?" "Please, just go inside." She did. As she closed the door, a young and status quo Vulcan woman turned away from the windows. She wore long robes and had her hands threaded together inside the sleeves. Her entire body had a majesty that Lela had never seen before. Although she had seen the woman's face, it was the same woman who had responded to her message. "I am Tapa," the woman said. We should talk." It felt odd to have her, to have anyone here among Lela's meager possessions. Her furniture was provided. The bits of artwork on the wall had been done by a childhood friend. The sparseness of the apartment seemed to stand out painfully in the Vulcan's presence. T'Pau seemed to sense Lela's discomfort. "You have great courage," she said. Lela shook her head. "I am a great fool." "I have seen something foolish about you." "I have seen nothing foolish about you." T'Pau glanced at the wooden chair beside her. Lela blushed. "I'm sorry. Please have a seat." "I know it is not customary for your people to allow others inside their private spaces," T'Pau said as she sat. "I should have gone through the proper channels, but it seemed no one wanted us to speak. I thought this course the most prudent." "It's fine," Lela said, wondering if what she had heard was actually an apology or if she had just imagined it. She sat in an unupholstered chair she rarely used. It made her feel as if she were the guest in her own home. T'Pau seemed focused on what she needed to say. "Your people are not used to first contacts. To meet another species is a different thing." "I'm beginning to realize that," Lela said. "We learn it every time we encounter one." T'Pau's speech patterns were oddly formal. She did not smile as she spoke. "Was this what made an alien? The subtle differences? The subtle differences? The fact that even though they seemed the same way, they were not? Or were there more obvious differences, like ears? The most important ones?" Lela couldn't tell. "Our most recent encounter," T'Pau said, "was with a strange species. We did not expect them to have a warp capabilities, but they did. They had suffered a devastating global war and were just recovering from it. A man in a remote area of their countryside built a warp ship as a beacon of hope. We saw it and initiated contact." Lela waited. Obviously, T'Pau was trying to impart something important. "They are highly passionate people. So passionate that even their music stirs the emotions. My colleagues on the ship that made the first contact reported that much of their music was physically painful to listen to." Lela frowned. She wasn't sure how this should matter to her. "But they are highly creative people and intuitive people who seem to use their intellect and their emotions in harmony to create new things. We believe that, given time, their potential will increase exponentially. Despite their recent troubles and a long history of discord, we believe they are on the verge of becoming a powerful force for civilization." "How do you know that?" Lela asked. "Knowledge. Our experience observing other cultures has demonstrated that it is the species who strive, who try new things, who unlimitedly thrive among the stars. Who ultimately thrive among the stars. Those that hide their heads stagnate. They do not survive. She understood that and didn't like that. I stuck my head out, but I made such a mistake. I believed the Lador harmless. I thought maybe they were in trouble. They were in trouble. In their own way of thinking, they rely on Aslon. It's necessary for the way they live, and they will not learn any other way, even though they have used up all the Alsalon in their own system. It has driven them to become a little more than pirates, even though they claim they will trade. I should have suspected something, Lela said. T'Pau shook her head. It is illogical to expect yourself to act differently in hindsight. However, you did not approach the Ladihar like Ladiar. You expected them to act like Trill. You must always trust a species to act in ways rational to its own culture. To do so requires you to understand that culture. It's not a task done lightly or quickly. Lela nodded. That made sense to her. But it's something logical. It made her wonder why she hadn't thought of it herself. T'Pau was watching her, dark eyes unfathomable. Lela folded her hands together. Why would you want to talk with me? You know I'm in disgrace. I know your people have much to learn when it comes to other species. That includes understanding that your search for knowledge is Trill's only salvation. Lela turned. She didn't know why she trusted this woman, but she did. Not with the state's secrets, only with her own. I contacted the Lajiar after I sent a message to you. I asked them if they were in trouble. Did I do something that might have provoked their attack? No, T'Pau said. It is, as I said in the message, they are an impatient people, even when negotiations are ongoing. Lela felt her shoulders relax. She didn't realize until that moment how much she feared that the attack was her fault. You have great courage, T'Pau repeated, and vision as well. You do not fear to imagine what lies ahead. Do not allow others to extinguish that quality within you. You must always do what you believe to be right. Odin says I'm too young to know what's right. T'Pau seemed to consider Lela for a moment. In this universe, we are all young, Lela Dax, she said at last. That is the subtle truth that often eludes so many promising life forms. Youth contains the potential for growth. Once an individual or a culture forgets that, the growth stops. Your world needs people like you, Lela Dax. Never doubt that. Before Lela could respond, T'Pau rose from her chair, apparently satisfied that she had accomplished what she had set out to do. She held up her right hand, paired fingers parted, thumb at rest. Live long, T'Pau said, and prosper. It seemed to have more meaning than a simple sentence, but Lela did not know how to respond. Thank you, she said. Then T'Pau turned away and let herself out of the apartment. Lela watched her go. What Lela's people saw as a character flaw, T'Pau saw as a survival trait, and maybe they were both right. For the first time since her indictment, Lela smiled. A short time later, a runner knocked at her door. The council has made a decision, he said. You're to come with me. She did. Her meeting with T'Pau had left her calmer, ready to face whatever came to her, no matter what the cost. The runner led Lela through a side corridor that went down, not up. He was taking her to the chamber floor. Her hands started to shake. She wouldn't be allowed to return to her desk. They were going to throw her out of the council. Her political career would be over. The runner opened a small door that led to a passageway under some of the desks. Then he swept his arms forward, indicating that she should go through. As the door stood, Lytus and Odin, she couldn't tell from their expressions on their face what the verdict was. Stand in the center of the floor, please, Lytus said. She walked past him without a word, to the spot he had indicated. His podium was slightly to her left. He did not stand behind it. Instead, he waited on the Periphery? 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 I don't know what that is. Waited on the periphery like Odin. The other council members filled their seats. They looked around, and the room had a faint scent of sweat and rotting food. They had spent a lot of the hours here debating her fate. Her fate, and in its own way, that of Trill. Condemning her for trying to act when they would not would mean that despite the resolutions that they passed, they had no intentions of learning about the other species. Lela Dax, the voice belonged to the sergeant at arms. You've been tried on the charges of treason. The council has delivered its verdict. You shall stand and hear. She stood straighter, but she couldn't turn to see the counselors behind her. The ones in the front could not meet her gaze. Lela Dax, the sergeant at arms continued, you've been tried on charges of treason and found not guilty. She let out a small breath. But because you have violated resolutions made by this august body, you must bear the consequences. A shiver ran through her whole body. She wasn't guilty of treason. Odin had argued that for her, and done well. Lela Dax, the council has issued a formal reprimand that will remain upon your record throughout all of the Dax symbiont's life. Should you ever act against council's resolutions again, you shall face a harsher penalty. Do you understand your punishment? There's a small silence before she realized she had to respond. Yes. Have anything to say in your own defense? She stepped toward the podium. Odin's eyes widened as he shook his head slightly. Clearly, he didn't want her to speak. Lela placed her hands on the podium and felt it slowly rise until it was in the center of the room. Then the podium spun slowly. I have nothing to say in my defense, she said, but I do need to speak. She surveyed the council. The members were watching her, their attention rapt. She thought she saw Odin stiffen, as if he was afraid she would undo all of his good work. I have learned much these last few days, she said. I have learned painfully my own limitations. I have not yet realized how to look outside myself, and in failing that, I have not learned how to look outside my own culture. For that, I ask the council's forgiveness. Several members were nodding. Odin blinked, looking faintly surprised. Thank you, she said, for being lenient with me. I will do all I can to regain your trust. Then she turned to Lidas. And now you need to tell me how to get down. Laughter rippled through the council chambers and sounded to Lela like relieved laughter. Lidas touched a small button near the base, and the podium came down on its own. Lela left. Lidas touched her arm. You may take your seat again. Lela smiled but did not thank him. Then she walked back towards the door. She was still shaking, but she felt stronger than she had in a long time, maybe stronger than she ever had. She stopped in front of Odin. I owe you my career, she said. I don't know how to thank you. He studied her for a moment. I didn't do this for you, he said. I did this for those who died. You weren't the only one who didn't know how to look outside our culture. The council, and perhaps Trill itself, had the same flaw. Only you tried. If we had listened to you, lives would have been saved. Perhaps, Lela said. A wise woman recently told me that it's not logical to expect yourself to act differently in hindsight. That's true, Odin said. But it's important to examine your mistakes so that you won't make them again. I can't change what we did or how we handled the Lajihar, but I could change how we handled you. She smiled slightly to the idea of having to be handled at all. Still, she said, I owe you thanks and more. Then do me one favor, Odin asked. Anything. Don't let this incident cause you to lose your passion. I thought you disapproved of it. His lips thinned. It took her a moment to realize he was suppressing a smile. I think I may have envied it, maybe even feared it. But I've grown to understand your passion is your strength. And my weakness, Lela said. He nodded slightly, then said, in most things, I probably won't be your ally. I don't expect you to be. We're too different. I know. But you've taught me that differences can be strength too. He turned towards Lidas, who had watched the entire exchange. We should send for the emissary from Vulcan now. Lidas frowned. This is happening too fast. Odin glanced at Lela. This time he did smile. Some would say that this didn't happen fast enough. Lela knew better to get into the middle of that argument. Lela knew better than to get into the middle of that argument. Let the old times worry about the swiftness of change. Let the old timers worry about the swiftness of change. She was glad it was happening at all, and the doors were opening. She could scarcely wait to hear what T'Pau had to say about the stars, about the other species, about the minds who dwelled on distant words. Perhaps someday in this lifetime, or a different one, she would have a chance to see those exotic places for herself, to breathe their air, to speak their people. But for now, learning about them would be enough. Learning about them and helping her world open its doors to the universe. Yay! This is such a good chapter. I forgot it was really long, though. It's so long. The next one is Tobin. His quote on the page is, painfully shy, introverted, a certain lack of confidence. Just the kind of person who would begin looking for ways to dazzle people with his magical abilities. So, I am excited. We will read this